Imagine a British comedy without the chaps from Mrs. Brown. Hard, huh? With its obscene gags, this sitcom, whether you like it or not, broke onto the scene in 2011 and became a cultural sensation. The over-the-top personalities were unique, noisy, disorderly, and unapologetically traditional. Some of the main cast members departed throughout the years in a calm manner, while others caused controversy. The reason behind their departure from one of the most popular shows in the UK and Ireland? Individual conflicts? Differences in creativity? Or something else? Let's examine it in more detail. Examine how the departure of these actors from Mrs. Brown's Boys affected the program in a permanent way. Before it became one of the most popular comedies on the BBC, Mrs. Brown's sons began their lives away from the bright lights of TV studios. Actually, the story begins on little Irish stages in the early 1990s. A struggling writer and stand-up comedian at the time, Brendan O'Carroll had an idea. Drawing inspiration from the Irish matriarchs he had known growing up, he developed a figure that would transform his life. Agnes Brown. Agnes was a down-to-earth, foul-mouthed, loving mother from Dublin who was equal parts chaotic and kind. She was first presented by O'Carroll in his radio drama and then in his self-published book, The Mammy, which set the stage for what would quickly become a popular theatrical production. Brendan himself was never supposed to play Agnes Brown, at least not initially. But when the actress who was initially chosen for the part did not appear for a live reading of one of his early plays, Brendan took the usual action of a natural-born actor. He put on a frock and a wig and dressed up like the character. In an instant, Mrs. Brown was born. On stage instead of on paper. Immediately, audiences reacted. There was an unpredictability and rawness to it. And truthful about this Irish mother who, by sheer willpower, managed to keep her family together while breaking down barriers and shouting love-filled insults. Brendan started touring it around the nation and eventually the seas as the play gained momentum. These products were by no means polished or traditional. The confusion was actually a part of its charm. They cut mislined cues. Uncharacteristically, direct address and remarks to the crowd replaced the prepared portions. It wasn't one of those pretentious facials, but it was this one, and it was hilarious. Working-class Irish and British audiences, who did see some representation of their families on stage, albeit louder, dirtier, and typically with a pint and a swear word, were especially drawn to the shows, which developed a cult following. The first time Mrs. Brown's Boys appeared on screen was in 2011, nearly 20 years after its initial stage appearance. Nevertheless, the UK's BBC One gambled on a low-budget sitcom adaptation of O'Carroll's novel. A large portion of the concept was still based on live audiences, stage traditions, production flaws, and direct-to-camera remarks. Critics were not impressed. They had a field day with the show since it was perceived by fans as having an antiquated sense of humor, overly suggestive representations, and allegedly cheesy laughs. It wasn't only a persona that Brendan O'Carroll created. He based the cast on his actual friends and family. Jennifer Gibney, his wife, portrayed Agnes's daughter Kathy. Fiona, his daughter, played Maria, and Danny, his son, played Dermot. Eilish O'Carroll, his sister, even made an appearance as the endearing neighbor next door, Winnie McGugan. The series had an indisputable chemistry and warmth that even the most ardent critic could not dispute, yet the very realism of that intimacy also occasionally led to unavoidable issues. Tensions would occasionally surface off-screen as relationships changed over time. More than ever, the brand and the show were inseparable. In Australia and the UK, the live tour continued with crowded arenas. With record-breaking viewership each year, Christmas specials were a must-watch television program. In addition to novels, DVDs, and souvenirs, there was also the 2014 feature film Mrs. Brown's Boys D. That did well in the UK and Irish box offices despite receiving negative reviews. A comedic empire was established by Brendan O'Carroll, in addition to creating a persona. However, fame also came with conflict. Cast members who had been with the show for years started to leave. Some for more business-related disagreements, while others for personal ones. And the fans started to pay attention. Even yet, Mrs. Brown's Boys continues to be a cultural touchstone of British and Irish television, despite its flaws. No matter how you feel about it, its influence cannot be denied. Mrs. Brown's Boys stands out in a time of high-concept sitcoms and prestige television because it is unabashedly raw, stubbornly traditional, and unrepentant. Resilience, enthusiasm, and the strength of taking a chance even if that risk involves a cardigan dad screaming at his kids in a mock living room are the hallmarks of this success tale. For Brendan O'Carroll, what started out as a last-minute stage substitution evolved into one of the most lasting comedic works of a generation. Change was already in the works behind the scenes, beginning with a close friend of Brendan O'Carroll, even as the show was finding its groove on screen. Fiona O'Carroll, Brown, Maria. One of the first significant departures that caused a stir among the Mrs. Brown's Boys fan base was that of Fiona O'Carroll, who portrayed Maria Brown, Dermot's patient wife and Agnes's sweet but independent daughter-in-law. Fiona was not merely a part of the cast. She had existed from the start of the Mrs. Brown universe and was the real-life daughter of Brendan O'Carroll. From early stage productions in the 1990s to the BBC primetime adaptation, Fiona had a hand in making Maria one of the most realistic and approachable characters on the show. Fans were therefore taken aback in 2022 when it was announced that she would not be joining the group for the live stage tour. The impact of her departure must be understood in light of how intricately Fiona was woven into the fabric of the program. A classic sitcom was never Mrs. Brown's Boys. This was a family matter. The show practically grew up with Fiona. Before the television lights, before the world tours, before the celebrity, she was there. When the lines were fumbled on stage and the jokes landed with a wink and a nudge, she played Maria. As time went on, Fiona's persona changed from a reserved newbie to the Brown family circus to a key figure, the voice of reason in a world of wild antics, and the calm in the midst of madness. When asked directly about her departure, Fiona shockingly opened up and gave a disarming response. She found herself at a turning point in her life after more than 10 years of participating in the portrayal of Maria. It was like living someone else's story, she remarked. My own has to be written. Not merely ignoring a character, but becoming much closer to accepting herself. After all, the woman was a 40-year-old mother who essentially found a life outside of Brown's iron prison at home. There was no quick or instinctive response. It was self-reflexive. Speaking about a moment spent with her children, a place to develop, and the realization that she needed time away from something that no longer felt like it belonged to her or had that certain feel to it. Naturally, conjecture ensued. Spectators questioned whether anything else was happening. Were there any dramas occurring behind the scenes? Did familial strife simmer beneath the surface? After all, ending a show in which your father is in charge can't be simple. Fiona, however, quickly put an end to such rumors. She stressed that there was no conflict, no blowback, and no bad sentiments in interview after interview. She continued to have a close relationship with her father, Brendan. Brendan has expressed his support and pride in the choice. I respect her for understanding what she needs, and he informed the media that she is my daughter first, not just Maria. In fact, it didn't lessen the impact of her absence. There were no wigs, tossed hoots, falls, or strewn salting, making Maria Brown perhaps the least ostentatious figure on the show. She had to be there. For the emotional fulcrum, Dermot. In Agnes's mind, the balance beam is insane. The audiences also serve as a stand-in in many respects. Because Maria was a real person, she responded to the cartoonish turmoil like any other person would. It made Mrs. Brown's Boys feel a little less grounded and a little more insane. Fans were able to distinguish the difference even though other characters stepped in. The show's established dynamics were also disrupted by Fiona's choice. Mrs. Brown's Boys have long been strong because of their close-knit cast, which consists of a complex mix of longtime friends and family. But the formerly obdurate core started to change over time. Fiona's exit was one of the first indications that a family program founded on loyalty and tradition would undergo change. Her decision sparked conversations on burnout, self-care, and the need to break away from something you love when it no longer fills your soul. Fiona has shied away from the limelight nearly completely since leaving the program. Although she is open to the possibility of going back to acting, she has decided to prioritize her family time. She occasionally participates in interviews and speaks on stage, but she has never expressed regret about leaving. She appears more grounded than ever, on the opposite. and has demonstrated that leaving can sometimes mark the beginning of a new chapter rather than the conclusion of the story. It's possible that Mrs. Brown's boys no longer view her as Maria Brown. Fiona O'Carroll's legacy within the show, however, is undeniable. Rory Cowan. Right. Now, this one hurt. Fans were taken aback when Rory Cowan, who portrayed the flamboyant and gorgeous Rory Brown, announced his resignation from Mrs. Brown's Boys in 2017. He was more than a mere actor. He was the life of the party. Rory's exuberant enthusiasm, extravagant attire, and incisive humor added a certain kind of fun to the series that few characters may be matched. His character's incessant teasing of Agnes, his ludicrous facial expressions, and his chemistry with Brendan O'Carroll made him an immediate favorite among fans. Many people considered Rory to be Mrs. Brown's son, therefore his departure seemed like a loss of the show's soul. The Brown family had known Rory for a long time before the television cameras ever turned on. He actually began his career as Brendan O'Carroll's publicist, working behind the scenes to help promote the early stage shows in the UK and Ireland. When the part of Rory, Agnes's son, finally needed to be filled, Brendan offered him the part. It was just supposed to be a short-term solution until someone else was located. With his distinctive bleached hair, contagious laugh, and distinct demeanor, Rory successfully embodied the role in a manner that no other actor could. Rory quickly won over the hearts of the crowd and established himself as an indispensable member of the group. In 2017, when he left the live stage tour, the one question that fans had was, why? Why would a prominent and seemingly content individual leave a show that is so popular and obviously successful? The cause turned out to be emotional, intimate, and, above all, very human. In subsequent interviews, Rory stated that Brendan, disagreements, or even disagreements about creativity had no bearing on the choice. His mother had something to do with it all. For more than 10 years, Rory had taken care of his elderly mother while Mrs. Brown's Boys set up a rigorous traveling and filmmaking schedule. The amount of time he spent traveling and being away from home put strain on him. Following his mother's passing, he had made the decision to take stock of his life. He acknowledged that for a while he had been emotionally aloof from it. He claims that I was depressed during the show. It wasn't enjoyable to me. It was time for me to leave. But it wasn't because he didn't care about the folks he worked with, or that he was no longer in the same place, or that he did not value his fans. The euphoria that had sustained his performance gave way to something more substantial. A desire for something far more intimate, grief, and burnout. Despite his reputation for bright clothing and loud laughter, Rory's choice turned into a fairly subdued act of self-care. The decision was well received by fans, However, it was challenging for them. The part was recast in addition to Rory being written off the show. In actuality, the beloved character Rory Brown was reallocated to Damien McKiernan, a former Mr. Ireland, who tried to add some of his own personality to the role. However, accepting the shift was difficult. Even though Damien had put his all into it, it was still not the same. The chemical composition. It lacked the voice and the humorous timing. It was an extremely difficult transition for a large audience of historical watchers. Their relationship with Agnes had changed significantly, and the new Rory didn't resemble their old one at all. Something crucial vanished. At the same time, Rory Cowan remained. He steered clear of other initiatives. He portrayed the role of John Bosco Walsh in the 2019 season of the popular Irish serial opera City. Rory was able to demonstrate some dramatic skills outside of comedy because of the shift in tone and role type. In addition, Rory Cowan was getting ready to publish his memoir, Mrs. Cowan's Boy, in which he talked about his life, sexual orientation, family, and yes, his time on Mrs. Brown's Boys. Rory presented the image of a man who had been a performer, a caregiver, and a son for many years, and who was making a concerted effort to be himself in spite of everything. Even though Rory's departure was somewhat low-key in comparison to his high-profile on-screen appearances, his character's legacy on the program endures. He was frequently the character's heart that brought color, even though he might not have been the loudest in every moment. Warmth to the Brown home and mischief. He was a delight crutch for audiences. He laid the groundwork for the entire show. Additionally, Brendan O'Carroll saw him as more than just a co-star. He was a reliable friend. Even though Rory Cowan has put down his shoes and wig, his performance as Rory Brown will always be remembered as one of the show's most memorable moments. Keep your mouth shut. As a result of the next actor's departure from Mrs. Brown's Boys. Gary Hollywood. The departure of Gary Hollywood from Mrs. Brown's Boys might be the most contentious of all. Gary had been Rory's on-screen sidekick since the first TV specials, playing Dino Doyle, the flamboyant, fashion-forward hairdresser. Dino immediately became a scene stealer thanks to his flawlessly styled hair, keen tongue, and indisputable appeal. His humorous chemistry with Rory, who was first portrayed by Rory Cowan, making them a popular coupling in a chaotic show. Fans adored Dino because of his outrageous attitude and devoted friendship, which added color and balance to the cast. However, all of that changed in 2020. It wasn't a quiet transfer or personal development that caused Gary to leave the show this time. It happened all at once. The noise was loud. And it received media attention. For a program that took great pride in portraying a single, happy family both on and off screen, Gary's departure and the circumstances surrounding it were extremely disturbing. The episode was not a heartfelt farewell. An explanation was not even displayed on the screen. During the Christmas and New Year's specials, Dino just disappeared, and fans started to wonder what had happened. According to Gary, the matter was straightforward, a disagreement over salary. He said that his compensation for the 2020 film was much lower than that of the other members of the cast, including Damian McKiernan, who had replaced Rory Brown. Yandy, specials for the holiday. Gary states that after voicing his concerns to the production staff, he was kicked out of any more episodes. He talked about how the decision caught him off guard, particularly after more than 10 years of participation on the event. According to him afterward, the loss of the job wasn't the only thing that hurt. It was the feeling that a production that, in his opinion, treated its actors like family had betrayed them. The events happened so quickly that Gary filed a lawsuit against Brendan O'Carroll and other show producers for his claims of discrimination, wrongful dismissal, and uneven compensation. In Ireland and the UK, it suddenly became a cause célèbre. No longer just another sitcom, Mrs. Brown's Boys was fully engrossed in a public legal drama. Fans were split. Some have spoken out in favor of Gary, claiming that he was wrongly fired after years of being a devoted employee. Others backed Brendan, arguing that it might have been a simple business choice or misunderstanding. But regardless of one's stance, the harm had already been done. The family image of the show was shattered. Brendan refuted the charges, saying that there was no discriminatory basis for them and that the whole situation was a miscommunication. He expressed in interviews his surprise at the way the problem has developed, claiming to have attempted to settle the dispute behind the camera. However, it was clear that there would be no reconciliation because of the impending legal action and the tense media coverage. Dino had left and was not returning. In his absence, no replacement was available. No substitute for humorous relief or a fresh hairstylist. The character, who was formerly a major character in numerous scenes, simply vanished without a trace. The longtime fans saw Dino's departure as more than a simple casting change. He has added something quite unique to Mrs. Brownhead's entire universe. Very outspoken, endearing, colorful, yet grounded. His connection with Rory and his flourishing comedic relationship with Agnes were sufficient to elevate the performance to a new level. Without it, certain tales simply don't feel whole. There are subtle changes in some character dynamics. Additionally, it reminds us that even shows that are based on comedy and real life are occasionally subject to behind-the-scenes rip-offs. The cast had never been subjected to such intense scrutiny before, and they were a close-knit group. Since leaving, Gary has remained largely silent about the case's specifics. He has, nevertheless, voiced dissatisfaction with the course of events. He has kept performing in stage productions and public engagements, but he never made an appearance in Mrs. Brown's Boys again. However, he will always be Dino to many admirers, the campy, self-assured hairdresser who lights up the screen whenever he enters. The void he left behind has never been fully filled. Even as the concert continues, it is apparent that something, or rather, someone, is absent. Jennifer Gibney. As Kathy Brown, Agnes's bright, contemporary, and much overlooked daughter, Jennifer Gibney, has been a part of Mrs. Brown's Boys since the show's beginning. She has a real-life relationship with the show's creator, which makes her role special in addition to her character. The guy behind the notorious Agnes Brown, Brendan O'Carroll, is Jennifer's husband. There has always been an odd allure to their mother-daughter relationship on television. The fact that their husband and wife were not on camera added to the surrealness. However, as the seasons progressed, spectators began to detect something strange. Kathy was fading away little by little. The straight man, Kathy Brown, was always portrayed as the cool-headed, sensible, and professional antidote to the rest of the Brown family's insanity. Kathy was frequently the voice of reason, if not the jokes, but in her role as a psychologist. When her mother sabotaged her efforts to preserve her dignity. In previous seasons of the show, her sexual mishaps, failed romances, and dry delivery were commonplace. Things started to change, though, around the middle of the decade. Kathy began to show up less frequently. Her scenes were shorter. Once crucial, her presence started to feel more like a cameo. It was not ignored. People started to wonder if Kathy was being written out. Did the backstage tension exist? Was Brendan deliberately phasing out his wife's character from the show? The shift was noticeable, even though it appeared improbable, and rumors started to circulate. Some people began to think that the mother-daughter conflict on film was too personal. There were many who entertained the idea that Jennifer might simply be sick of performing the same act, particularly one in which her husband frequently talked over, ignored, or made fun of her in drag. It turns out that the reality is far more based in creative choice but much less dramatic. Interviews revealed that Jennifer and Brendan had reached an agreement over her absences. No disagreement, repercussion, or creative divide existed. Indeed, Brendan has boasted about Jennifer in all forms of media, referring to her as his most creative collaborator. Kathy's deliberate retreat from the spotlight was something they both mentioned. Brendan may then consider developing narratives for additional characters, particularly those who are more recent or insignificant, like Grandad, Winnie, or Buster. At the same time, Jennifer acknowledged that she believed Kathy had reached her limit. Either a really nice, extensive makeover or a simple, elegant fade are the options. It would make sense in terms of the story. The modern daughter attempting to maintain her sanity in the face of a broken home has long been compared to Kathy. But for a number of seasons, it has been harder to come up with new ideas because of the abundance of jokes and failed relationships. Rather than attempting to retain the character in the game, Jennifer and Brendan decided to give her a more supporting role. Despite never being formally written out, it was given less and fewer scenes and became increasingly ancillary to main plotlines rather than central to them. However, the absence of Kathy was noticed subtly by those viewers who had begun watching the show from the very first episode. She and the others became the series' emotional center. A soothing presence in a crazy world. Without her constant sarcasm and tired eye rolls, the house was a little more bizarre. The dynamics of the series also subtly changed as a result of her absence. With fewer heterosexual characters, the tone shifted even more in the direction of surrealism and broad humor. There is still some disagreement among fans regarding whether or not this is a better program. Despite the fact that it was slow and silent, there is little doubt that Kathy is leaving holes. You will be rendered dumbfounded by the last reason someone left Mrs. Brown's Boys, so save your astonishment. McKiernan Damian. Rory Cowan's departure from Mrs. Brown's Boys in 2017 was more than a simple cast change. It was a profound change. With his exuberant energy and flawless comedic timing, Cowan had been a fan favorite for decades on the show. The announcement that Damian McKiernan would take his position therefore caused immediate and tremendous pressure. Former Mr. Ireland Damian, who had few acting credits, was taking on the role of a beloved figure whose personality had been so strongly influenced by the actor who had played him in the first place. It was a challenge as well as a chance for Damian. According to all accounts, Damian's portrayal of Rory Brown was significantly different. The character was loud, expressive, and full of flashy flair in Rory Cowan's portrayal, while Damian's Rory was quieter, more grounded, and more reserved. And perhaps less vibrant. They observed that change. The show's viewers were quick to comment on the adjustment, with many finding it difficult to adapt to the new dynamic. It was not necessarily a question of skill. Damien did have his moments, but the rhythm and chemistry between Cowan's Rory and Brendan O'Carroll's Agnes had shifted. It seemed like a completely other character to some. Despite everything, Damien stayed on course. He stayed on the show for years, appearing in both live performances and Christmas specials. Over time, some viewers learned to live with his rendition, while others were stuck with the original. Being faithful to a character while interpreting it in your own way was a challenging balancing act, particularly when that character was already well known to another. In the midst of all of that, Damien always acted professionally, showed up, carried out his duties, and fit in with the group. However, nothing was as perfect as it seemed behind it all. At this point, the eyewitnesses had started spreading rumors among themselves. Regarding the year 2000, Damien was conspicuously absent from the advertisements and promotions. The wage issue, which was connected to Gary Hollywood's notorious departure, was eventually cited as another factor contributing to Damien's noteworthy absence. During those 20-day production days for the Christmas and New Year specials, Damien and Gary were reportedly astonished to learn of a significant wage disparity with some other cast members, according to both emerging news outlets. So, when they brought up the matter, Gary was discreetly dismissed. It is said that he did not give it much thought after that and left the station at about the same time. There was no confirmation, no final show, and no conclusion. Damien just didn't appear on the cast lists. This subtle exit conveys a lot. Mrs. Brown's lads are always full of laughter and cheers from the live audience. There was a lot of anxiety backstage, though. Concerns on the treatment of the entire cast, particularly the non-O'Carroll performers, were brought up by the argument. Claims of injustice have been refuted by Brendan, who has maintained that it was a misunderstanding rather than an indicator of an actor's worth. The harm, however, was already done. Critics brought up the same issue again, and fans missed the absence. Cast members disappeared like smoke when they left the show, either with little explanation or occasionally without any farewells. Damien must find this to be a bittersweet experience. He gets to appear in one of the biggest comedies in Britain and Ireland, on the one hand. He must, however, put up with the incessant comparisons to someone who has long since passed away, been involved in a physical altercation, and then abruptly disappeared. Taking over a role that is so strongly linked to another actor is no small feat, particularly since the audience always remembers the original. Damien did the best he could with what he had, but the persona never quite fit the way it used to. We now look forward to hearing from you. Which actor's exit from Mrs. Brown's Boys caught you off guard, and why? Tell us in the space provided below. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it entertaining. For more behind-the-scenes content, subscribe. To continue watching, remember to click on one of the videos displayed on your screen. You won't want to miss the next thing.